I forgot my work tools at my son's house. When I went back to get them, I accidentally overheard a conversation between him and my daughter-in-law. "Don't worry, in 2 weeks he'll start forgetting everything." I smiled. When they called me, I had already prepared a surprise. "I'm glad to have you here. I'm glad to..." Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought my own son would plan my downfall over a cup of coffee in my kitchen. At 68, I've learned that life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. That Thursday morning started like any other. I'd spent the early hours in my workshop crafting a jewelry box for Mrs. Patterson down the street. My hands might shake a little more than they used to, but they still remember the feel of good wood and the satisfaction of creating something beautiful. I was halfway home when I realized I'd left my favorite chisel and measuring tape behind. 43 years of woodworking, and those tools felt like extensions of my own hands. I couldn't bear the thought of them sitting there overnight, so I turned my old pickup around and headed back to Marcus's house. The driveway was empty except for Jennifer's sedan. Marcus must have been running errands. I used my key, the same one they'd insisted I keep after Martha passed 3 years ago. "Dad, we want you to feel welcome here any time," Marcus had said, holding my shoulders with what I thought was genuine concern. I should have knocked. I should have called out. But after 34 years of being Marcus's father, I didn't think twice about walking into what had once been his childhood home, the house Martha and I had saved for years to buy. The workshop was just off the kitchen, and as I gathered my tools, I heard voices drifting through the thin wall. Marcus and Jennifer, talking in those low, careful tones people use when they're discussing something they shouldn't. "I still think 2 weeks is cutting it close," Jennifer was saying. Her voice had that sharp edge it always got when she was planning something. I'd heard it before when she'd convinced Marcus to ask me for money to fix their roof, money that somehow went toward a vacation to Cabo instead. "Trust me, Jen. 2 weeks is perfect. By then, he'll be forgetting where he put his keys, mixing up appointments. The confusion will be obvious to everyone." My hand stilled on the chisel. They were talking about me. "And you're sure this will work?" Jennifer's voice was closer now, probably leaning against the kitchen counter the way she did when she was nervous. Marcus laughed, but it wasn't the warm laugh I remembered from his childhood. This was calculating, cold. "Dad's already showing signs. Last week he asked me the same question twice. Yesterday he couldn't remember if he'd fed that stray cat." "It's starting, Jen. We just need to help it along a little." The measuring tape slipped from my fingers, clattering against the concrete floor. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs, but their conversation continued without pause. "What about Dr. Morrison? He's known your father for years. He might not go along with it. That's why we're switching to Dr. Reeves. He doesn't know Dad's history. When we bring him in, confused and disoriented, Dr. Reeves will see exactly what we want him to see." I pressed my back against the workshop wall, my legs suddenly unsteady. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Marcus, my boy, the child I'd taught to ride a bike and throw a baseball, was plotting to make people think I was losing my mind. "The timing has to be perfect," Jennifer continued. "Once the doctor confirms the diagnosis, we can move forward with everything else. The guardianship, the power of attorney, all of it. Dad won't know what hit him. By the time we're done, he'll be grateful we're taking care of everything for him." Grateful? They thought I'd be grateful. I stood there in my own workshop, surrounded by the tools I'd collected over decades, listening to my son and daughter-in-law plan to steal my independence. The chisel in my hand felt foreign now, like I was holding someone else's life. My mind raced back through recent weeks, searching for signs I'd missed. The way Jennifer had started asking detailed questions about my daily routine, how Marcus had begun showing up unannounced, always with some excuse about checking on me, the subtle comments about my age, my memory, my ability to live alone. They'd been laying groundwork. "What if he fights it?" Jennifer asked. "He won't. Dad's always been conflict avoidant. Besides, once everyone believes he's declining, who's going to listen to him? It'll just look like the ramblings of an old man who can't accept reality." The cruelty of it took my breath away. They knew me well enough to predict my reactions, to use my own personality against me. They knew I'd suffered in silence rather than cause family drama. They were counting on it. I carefully placed my tools back in their case, moving slowly to avoid any noise. My hands were steadier than they'd been in months, as if hearing the truth had clarified something inside me. They thought I was becoming weak, confused, helpless. They were wrong. As I crept toward the back door, I heard Jennifer's voice one more time. 2 weeks from today, we'll have everything we need. Your father will never see it coming." I stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight, closing the door silently behind me. They were right about one thing: I hadn't seen it coming. But now that I knew what they were planning, everything was about to change. The drive home felt different, like I was seeing my neighborhood through new eyes. Every familiar street corner, every house I'd watched being built over the decades felt precious in a way it hadn't before. Because I realized now that Marcus and Jennifer weren't just planning to take my independence, they were planning to take my entire life. 2 weeks. They'd given themselves 2 weeks to destroy everything I'd built, everything I was. I smiled for the first time in hours. 2 weeks was plenty of time for me to prepare a surprise of my own. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, staring at a legal pad covered in notes. Sleep had been impossible after what I'd heard. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Marcus's voice saying I wouldn't see it coming. Well, I was seeing everything now. I'd spent the night thinking, really thinking about the past few months. The pieces were falling into place like a jigsaw puzzle I hadn't realized I was solving. Marcus's sudden interest in my finances. Jennifer's pointed questions about my doctor visits. The way they'd both started treating me like I was fragile, speaking slower, repeating things I'd heard perfectly well the first time. My phone rang at exactly 8:30, startling me from my thoughts. "Dad, how are you feeling this morning?" Marcus's voice was warm, concerned, the same voice that had been so calculating yesterday. "I'm fine, son, just having my coffee." "That's good. Listen, I was thinking, maybe we should look into getting you one of those medical alert systems. You know, just in case." There it was, another piece of their careful plan. "I don't think that's necessary, Marcus. I'm managing just fine." A pause. "Of course you are, Dad. I just worry about you being alone in that big house. What if you fell? What if something happened and you couldn't call for help?" The concern in his voice sounded so genuine that for a moment, I almost doubted what I'd heard. Almost. But then I remembered the coldness in his laugh, the calculated way he'd discussed my supposed confusion. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not ready for that yet." Okay, we'll talk about it later. Actually, Jen and I were wondering if we could stop by this afternoon. She found some information about local senior services that might interest you." "Senior services, I bet she did." "That sounds fine, I'll be here." After hanging up, I sat back in my chair and closed my eyes. They were moving faster than I'd expected. The medical alert system was clearly meant to establish that I needed monitoring. The senior services information would probably include details about assisted living facilities. I needed to understand exactly what they were planning, and I needed to do it without arousing suspicion. At 10 o'clock, I drove to the library downtown. Mrs. Chen, the librarian who had helped me research woodworking techniques over the years, greeted me with her usual smile. "Mr. Hartley, how lovely to see you. What can I help you with today?" "I need to use one of the computers, if that's all right. I want to look up some legal information." She led me to a terminal and helped me get started. It took me a while. I'd never been comfortable with computers, but eventually I found what I was looking for. Guardianship laws, power of attorney procedures. The legal steps required to declare someone mentally incompetent. The reading made my stomach turn. It was all there, laid out in legal language that somehow made it sound reasonable. If someone could prove that I was no longer capable of making sound decisions, they could petition the court for guardianship. Once granted, the guardian would have control over my finances, my medical decisions, even where I lived. I printed out several pages and tucked them into my jacket pocket. Knowledge was power, and I was finally beginning to understand the game they were playing. My next stop was the office of Harold Kellerman, my longtime attorney. Harold had handled Martha's estate after she passed, and I trusted him more than anyone in professional matters. "Philip," Harold stood up from behind his massive oak desk, extending his hand. "This is a pleasant surprise. What brings you by?" I settled into the familiar leather chair across from his desk. "Harold, I need to ask you about something confidential. If someone wanted to challenge my mental competency, what would they need to do?" His gray eyebrows shot up. "That's an unusual question. Is there something specific you're concerned about?" I chose my words carefully. "Let's call it a hypothetical situation. What would the process look like?" Harold leaned back in his chair, studying me with the sharp eyes that had made him one of the most respected attorneys in town. "Well, hypothetically, someone would need to petition the court. They'd need medical evidence that the person was no longer capable of managing their affairs. Usually that means testimony from doctors, evidence of confusion or poor judgment, witnesses who can speak to declining mental capacity. And if such a petition were successful, the court would appoint a guardian. That person would have broad authority over the individual's life and finances." He paused. "Philip, if you're worried about this happening to you, I should mention that there are ways to protect yourself in advance, such as A comprehensive estate plan, for one. Clear directives about your wishes. You could also consider updating your will, making sure your affairs are in perfect order. That way, if anyone ever questioned your competency, there would be a paper trail showing you were thinking clearly. I nodded, filing this information away. Harold, I need to ask you something else. Do you have copies of my current will? Of course. It's the one we drafted 5 years ago, leaving everything to Marcus. My chest tightened. I'd forgotten about that will, made in the dark months after Martha's death when I couldn't imagine outliving my grief. At the time, leaving everything to Marcus had seemed natural, right? Now it felt like I'd loaded the gun they planned to use against me. I'd like to review that document, and Harold. I met his eyes. I may want to make some changes. He nodded slowly. I'll have my secretary pull the file. Philip, is everything all right? You seem troubled. Everything's fine, Harold. I'm just being cautious. But as I drove home, I knew everything was far from fine. Marcus and Jennifer weren't just planning to take control of my life. They were planning to inherit everything I owned. The will I'd made in my grief was giving them the perfect motive. They arrived at 3 o'clock sharp, Jennifer carrying a manila folder thick with papers. Dad, you look tired, Marcus said, kissing my cheek. Are you sleeping okay? I'm fine. I watched Jennifer arrange papers on my coffee table with practiced efficiency. We brought some information about wonderful programs for seniors in the area, she said brightly. Look at this one. They offer transportation to doctor appointments, meal delivery, even help with household maintenance. I picked up one of the brochures. Sunset Manor Assisted Living. The smiling elderly faces in the photographs looked happy enough, but I noticed the small print about memory care units and secured facilities. This looks expensive, I said. Jennifer and Marcus exchanged a glance. Well, yes, Marcus said, but Dad, you can afford it, and honestly, it might be worth considering sooner rather than later. Why the rush? It's not a rush, Jennifer said quickly. It's just that the waiting list for the good places can be long, and you're not getting any younger. I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering their words. You know, you're probably right. Would you mind if I kept these brochures? I'd like to look them over carefully. Relief flooded their faces. Of course, Dad, Marcus said. Take all the time you need. After they left, I spread the brochures across my kitchen table. Every facility they'd chosen had one thing in common. They all offered memory care units. They weren't just planning to move me out of my home. They were planning to move me somewhere designed for people with dementia. I looked around my kitchen, at the table where Martha and I had eaten breakfast for 32 years, at the window where I watched the seasons change, at the walls lined with photos of Marcus growing up. They wanted to take all of this away and lock me in a place where my protest would be dismissed as the confusion of a sick mind. But I wasn't sick, and I wasn't confused. I was angry. That evening, as I sat in Martha's favorite chair, I made a decision. They thought they were playing chess while I was playing checkers. They thought they were manipulating a helpless old man who would never see their moves coming. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 3 days later, I discovered the real reason behind their urgency, and it was worse than anything I could have imagined. I was returning from my morning walk when I saw Marcus's car in my driveway again. This was the 4th unexpected visit this week. Through my front window, I could see him and Jennifer in my living room, and they weren't alone. A woman in a business suit sat across from them, papers spread across my coffee table. I stayed outside, moving around to the side of the house where I could hear through the partially open window. The landscaping Martha had planted years ago provided perfect cover. Mr. and Mrs. Hartley, I understand your concerns about your father, the woman was saying. Her voice was crisp, professional, but guardianship proceedings require substantial evidence of mental incapacity. We have documentation, Jennifer replied. I've been keeping detailed notes of his confusion episodes. Last week he forgot he'd already watered his plants and flooded the basement. Yesterday he called me 3 times asking the same question about his medication. My blood ran cold. I'd never flooded any basement, and I took my medication with military precision, just as I had for the past 15 years. She was lying, creating a fictional version of my life. That's helpful, the lawyer said, but we'll need medical testimony. Has he been evaluated by a physician recently? We're working on that, Marcus said. The challenge is getting him to agree to see someone new. He's been with the same doctor for 20 years, and Dr. Morrison knows him too well to be objective about his decline. I see. Well, once you have the medical evaluation, we can move forward. But I have to ask, is there any urgency to this situation? Sometimes families wait until there's a crisis. There was a pause, and I pressed closer to the window. Actually, there is something, Jennifer said, her voice dropping. We recently discovered that Philip changed his will about 18 months ago. He left everything to some charity instead of his family. My heart stopped. They'd found out about the children's hospital bequest. He what? Marcus's voice was sharp, angry. This was news to him. I found the paperwork when I was looking for his insurance information, Jennifer continued smoothly. Apparently, he decided to leave his entire estate to the children's hospital. The house, the savings, everything. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear Marcus processing this information, understanding what it meant for their plans. That's impossible, he finally said. Dad would never do that without talking to me. The will is dated 18 months ago, the lawyer said. Was your father showing any signs of confusion at that time? He was grieving Mom, Marcus said slowly. He wasn't thinking clearly. People took advantage of him, convinced him to make decisions he wouldn't normally make. Another lie. I'd made that will with complete clarity after months of consideration. Martha and I had always planned to leave something to charity. After she died, I'd decided to leave it all. Marcus had his own life, his own career. The children at the hospital needed help more than he needed an inheritance. If we can prove he was mentally compromised when he made that will, the lawyer continued, we might be able to challenge it, especially if we have evidence that his mental state has continued to decline. So if we get guardianship, Jennifer said, we can contest the will? Potentially, yes. A guardian can argue that a previous will was made during a period of diminished capacity, especially if there's a pattern of decline. I gripped the window ledge, my knuckles white. Now I understood the real urgency. This wasn't just about controlling my life. It was about the money. Marcus had debts, problems I hadn't known about, and Jennifer had discovered that his inheritance had disappeared. How much are we talking about? The lawyer asked. The house alone is worth $400,000, Jennifer said. Plus, there's about $200,000 in savings and investments. $600,000, enough to solve whatever financial crisis had driven them to this. That's certainly substantial enough to justify the legal expenses, the lawyer said. But remember, guardianship is serious business. Once it's granted, you'll have complete responsibility for his care and welfare. Are you prepared for that commitment? Of course, Marcus said quickly. He's my father. I want what's best for him. The hypocrisy made me sick. What was best for me was apparently losing my home, my independence, and my right to decide what happened to my own money. There's one more thing, Jennifer added. Philip has been acting paranoid lately. He's suspicious of people trying to help him, resistant to suggestions about his safety. Yesterday, he accused me of moving his things around. That's actually good for our case, the lawyer said. Paranoia is often one of the early signs of dementia. Document everything, every suspicious comment, every moment of confusion. The more evidence we have, the stronger our position. They continued talking, but I'd heard enough. I crept back to the front of the house and waited in my truck until they left. When the lawyer's car disappeared down the street, I sat there for a long time, staring at my own front door. They weren't just planning to steal my independence, they were planning to steal my legacy. The money I'd intended for sick children would instead go to pay off Marcus's gambling debts, because that's what this was about, wasn't it? Jennifer had mentioned his problems in passing months ago, something about bad investments. I'd assumed he'd worked it out. I thought about the will I'd made, the careful consideration I'd given to every decision. Martha and I had always believed in helping others, in leaving the world a little better than we'd found it. The children's hospital had saved 3 kids in our neighborhood over the years. Giving them my estate felt like honoring Martha's memory, but Marcus and Jennifer saw only dollar signs and their own convenience. That evening I called Harold Kellerman at home. Harold, I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. It's urgent. Of course, Philip. Is everything all right? No, I said, looking around my living room at the photos of Marcus growing up, at the life Martha and I had built together. But it will be. After hanging up, I walked through my house, really seeing it for the first time in months. This place held 43 years of memories of laughter and tears and quiet moments that had made up a life. They wanted to take it all away and convince the world I was too confused to understand what I was losing. But I understood perfectly, and tomorrow I would start fighting back. I went to my desk and pulled out a notebook, the same kind I'd used for woodworking projects over the years. At the top of the first page, I wrote, "Evidence of manipulation." Then I began documenting everything I could remember from the past few months. Every lie Jennifer had told about my behavior, every manipulation, every moment when I'd felt like they were testing me. They thought they were building a case against my mental competency. Instead, they'd given me everything I needed to build a case against them. As I wrote, I realized something that made me smile for the first time in days. They'd made one crucial mistake in their planning. They assumed I was the same grief-stricken man who'd made that first will 5 years ago, someone who would suffer in silence rather than fight back. They were about to learn that grief had made me stronger, not weaker, and that a man who'd survived 68 years, Raised a family and built a life from nothing wasn't going to go quietly into the night, just because it was convenient for them. The next morning, Harold Kellerman listened to my story with the poker face that had served him well in 40 years of law practice. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Philip, what you're describing is elder abuse. Are you certain about what you heard?" "Every word." I handed him the notebook I'd filled the night before. "I've documented everything I can remember." He flipped through the pages, his expression growing grimmer with each entry. "This is thorough, but we need more than your word against theirs, especially if they're planning to question your mental capacity. What do you suggest?" Harold walked to his window, looking out at the courthouse across the street. "We need evidence, documentation, proof that you're being manipulated." He turned back to me. "Are you willing to let them think their plan is working while we gather what we need?" The idea of pretending to be confused, of letting Marcus and Jennifer believe they were succeeding, made my stomach turn, but I nodded. "What choice do I have?" "None, I'm afraid. But Philip, I want you to understand something. If we're going to fight this, we need to be absolutely certain of our ground. Once we reveal what we know, there's no going back. Your relationship with Marcus may never recover." I thought about the little boy who used to follow me around the workshop, begging to help with my projects. Then I thought about the man who'd discussed my mental decline like a business proposition. "That relationship is already gone, Harold. I just didn't realize it yet." He nodded slowly. "All right then, here's what we're going to do." Over the next hour, Harold outlined a plan that was both simple and devastating. I would appear to decline gradually, giving Marcus and Jennifer exactly what they expected to see. Meanwhile, Harold would work behind the scenes, documenting everything and preparing our defense. "The key is to make them overconfident," he explained. "Let them think they're in complete control. People make mistakes when they think they've already won." My first performance came that afternoon when Marcus called to check on me. "Dad, how are you feeling today?" I let a slight tremor creep into my voice. "I'm fine, I think. Although I couldn't find my keys this morning. They were in the refrigerator of all places." A pause. Marcus was probably writing this down. "The refrigerator? Dad, that's concerning." "Is it?" I thought maybe I was getting something out and just set them down without thinking. I made my voice sound genuinely confused. "You don't think there's something wrong with me, do you?" No, of course not. It's just, maybe we should have Dr. Morrison take a look at you, just to be safe." "Actually, Marcus, I've been thinking about that. Dr. Morrison is so busy these days and he's getting old too. Maybe it would be better to see someone younger, someone more up to date on these things." I could practically hear him smiling through the phone. "That's a great idea, Dad. I'll make some calls and find someone good." After hanging up, I felt sick. The ease with which the lies had come, the way I'd manipulated his concern, it felt like betraying everything I'd tried to teach him about honesty and integrity. But then I reminded myself who had started this game. 2 days later, Jennifer arrived with grocery bags, claiming she'd noticed I was out of food. She bustled around my kitchen, putting things away in places where I'd never kept them. "Jennifer, the soup cans go in the pantry, not the refrigerator." "Oh, I thought this would be easier for you to reach," she said sweetly. "You seem to be having trouble with some things lately." I watched her reorganize my entire kitchen, creating chaos where there had been order. Later I knew she'd ask me where something was, and when I couldn't find it immediately, she'd mark it down as another sign of confusion. The medical appointment was scheduled for the following week with Dr. Reeves, a geriatrician Marcus had found. I spent the days leading up to it practicing my performance, learning to be just confused enough to seem concerning but not so far gone that immediate action was required. Harold coached me carefully. "Remember, they want you to seem competent enough that the will change looks suspicious, but declining enough that current decisions can be questioned. It's a narrow line." The night before the appointment, I called Marcus to confirm the time. "Dad? You sound tired. Are you sleeping okay?" "I keep waking up confused about where I am," I lied. "Last night I got up to use the bathroom and couldn't remember which door it was." "That's exactly why we need to have you checked out. Dr. Reeves is supposed to be excellent with these kinds of issues." These kinds of issues. As if I were a problem to be solved rather than a person to be helped. The morning of the appointment, I sat in Dr. Reeves's waiting room with Marcus and Jennifer, watching them exchange meaningful glances every time I hesitated before answering a question or appeared momentarily uncertain about something. Dr. Reeves was younger than I'd expected, probably in his 40s, with the kind of confident demeanor that suggested he'd seen everything. He questioned me about my daily routine, my memory, my general health. I gave him exactly what Marcus and Jennifer wanted him to hear, a man showing early signs of cognitive decline but still functioning independently. "Mr. Hartley, I'm going to give you a few simple tests," Dr. Reeves said. Don't worry, they're just to establish a baseline. The tests were straightforward. Remembering lists of words, drawing a clock, simple arithmetic. I performed adequately, but not perfectly, making the kinds of small mistakes that would support the narrative Marcus and Jennifer were building. After the examination, Dr. Reeves spoke privately with Marcus and Jennifer while I waited in his office. Through the thin walls, I could hear fragments of their conversation. Early signs, but nothing definitive. Recommend follow-up in 6 months. Important to monitor changes. When they returned, Dr. Reeves addressed me directly. Mr. Hartley, I want to see you again in a few months. In the meantime, I think it would be wise to have family members help you with important decisions. Perfect. He'd given them exactly the medical opinion they needed without quite diagnosing dementia. On the drive home, Marcus and Jennifer were practically giddy. Dad, Dr. Reeves seems really good, Jennifer said. It's smart to have someone keeping an eye on these things. I suppose so, I said, letting doubt creep into my voice. I just hope I'm not becoming a burden to you both. You could never be a burden, Marcus said, but I caught him glancing at Jennifer in the rearview mirror. That evening, alone in my house, I called Harold to report on the appointment. It sounds like they're moving exactly as we predicted, he said. Have you given any more thought to the new will? I had. I'd spent hours thinking about it, about what Martha would have wanted, about what was fair and right, and I want to change it, Harold, but not the way they expect. What do you have in mind? I told him about my plan, and even Harold, who'd seen every kind of family drama in his 40-year career, was quiet for a long moment. Philip, are you absolutely certain about this? It's brilliant, but it's also irreversible. I'm certain. All right then. I'll have the documents prepared, but remember, once we execute this plan, you can't change your mind, and the consequences for Marcus and Jennifer will be severe. I looked around my living room, at the photos of Marcus growing up, at the memories of the family I'd thought we were. Then I thought about their conversation in my kitchen, about their casual discussion of my supposed mental decline, about their plans to warehouse me in a memory care facility while they spent my money. They made their choice, Harold. Now I'm making mine. 3 days later, the new will was signed and witnessed, locked away in Harold's safe where Marcus and Jennifer would never think to look for it. The document was a masterpiece of legal precision, and when they discovered its contents, they would understand that I'd been playing a very different game than they'd imagined. But first I had to let them think they were winning. The hardest part was still ahead, watching them accelerate their plans, treating me like an invalid, preparing to steal everything I'd worked for while believing I was too confused to understand what was happening. They had no idea that every move they made, every lie they told, every piece of evidence they manufactured was being carefully documented. They thought they were building a case against my competency. Instead, they were building the foundation of their own destruction. The call came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 10 days after my appointment with Dr. Reeves. I was in my workshop putting the finishing touches on a rocking chair I'd been crafting for my neighbor's new grandchild when the phone rang. Dad, we need to talk. Can Jen and I come over this afternoon? There was something different in Marcus's voice, a finality that told me their timeline had accelerated. Of course, son. Is everything all right? We just need to discuss some things about your care. Dr. Reeves called with some concerns. My grip tightened on the phone. Harold had warned me this moment would come, but I still felt my stomach drop. What kind of concerns? We'll talk about it when we get there. Don't worry, Dad. We're going to take care of everything. After hanging up, I sat in Martha's chair and called Harold. They're making their move today, I told him. Are you ready? I looked around my living room one last time as it was. My books on the shelves, Martha's photographs on the mantel, the life we'd built together still intact. By evening, everything would be different. I'm ready. Remember, Philip, let them reveal their hand completely. Don't react until they've shown you everything they plan to do. We need it all documented. Harold's recording device was hidden in the lamp beside my chair, invisible but capturing every word. I'd tested it 3 times that morning to make sure it worked perfectly. Marcus and Jennifer arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, accompanied by a woman I didn't recognize, middle-aged, professional, carrying a briefcase that screamed legal authority. Dad, this is Ms. Patterson. She's a social worker who specializes in elder care. Ms. Patterson smiled at me with practiced sympathy. Mr. Hartley, I understand you've been having some difficulties lately. Your family is concerned about your safety. I let confusion cross my face. Difficulties? I don't understand. Marcus sat forward, his expression earnest. Dad, Dr. Reeves called us yesterday. He's concerned about your test results. He thinks you might need more support than you're getting. What kind of support? Jennifer opened a folder, pulling out papers I recognized, the assisted living brochures she'd shown me weeks ago, plus several new ones. We've been researching some wonderful places where you'd be safe and well cared for. Miss Patterson nodded. The evaluation Dr. Reeves conducted suggests that you're experiencing early-stage cognitive decline. While you're still capable of many things, it would be prudent to establish a support system now before the situation becomes more serious. I stared at the papers in Jennifer's hands, letting my breath catch. You want to put me in a nursing home? Not a nursing home, Dad, Marcus said quickly. These are assisted living communities. You'd have your own apartment, activities, people to help with things like medication management and meal preparation. But I don't need help with those things. Dad, last week you called me 3 times asking if you'd taken your blood pressure medication, Jennifer said gently. And yesterday when I was here you couldn't remember where you'd put your insurance papers. Both lies, but told with such conviction that even I almost believed them. Ms. Patterson consulted her notes. According to Dr. Reeves, you scored in the borderline range on several cognitive assessments. That suggests it's time to consider transitional care options. I want to stay in my home, I said, letting my voice shake slightly. I know this is difficult, Ms. Patterson continued, but your family has your best interests at heart. Sometimes people in your situation don't recognize the extent of their limitations. That's part of the condition. The trap was closing around me exactly as they'd planned. Whatever I said now would be dismissed as the confusion of a declining mind. If I protested too strongly, I'd seem paranoid. If I agreed too easily, they'd know something was wrong. How long do I have to decide? I asked. Marcus and Jennifer exchanged glances. Well, Dad, we've actually already put you on the waiting list at Sunset Manor. It's one of the finest facilities in the area, and they have an opening in their memory care unit. Memory care unit. Even after all my preparation, the words hit like a physical blow. Memory care? But I don't have memory problems. Dad, you've been forgetting things, Marcus said patiently. Small things at first, but it's getting worse. Dr. Reeves explained that this is how it usually starts. Ms. Patterson leaned forward. Mr. Hartley, I know this seems frightening, but early intervention is key. The memory care unit at Sunset Manor isn't like what you might imagine. It's more like a secure apartment community where residents can't wander off and get lost. Secure, unable to leave. They were planning to lock me away. What about my house? We'll take care of everything, Jennifer said. Marcus and I will handle the sale, make sure you get a fair price. The proceeds will go into a trust to pay for your care. A trust they would control. I was beginning to understand the full scope of their plan. There's one more thing, Dad, Marcus said, pulling out another set of papers. Ms. Patterson thinks it would be wise to establish power of attorney just in case you need help making decisions in the future. There it was, the final piece. With power of attorney, they could control my finances completely. They could sell my house, access my savings, and do whatever they wanted with my money. I don't know, I said, letting uncertainty fill my voice. This all seems so sudden. I understand your reluctance, Ms. Patterson said, but delay often makes these transitions more difficult. Your family has found an excellent facility, and acting quickly means you'll get the room in the memory care unit before it's given to someone else. The pressure was subtle but relentless. They were using my supposed confusion against me, making it seem like I was too impaired to understand what was best for me. Can I think about it overnight? Of course, Marcus said, but I caught the tightness around his eyes. They didn't want to give me time to think, time to potentially talk to someone who might question their story. Actually, Jennifer added, Ms. Patterson's schedule is quite busy. If we could just sign the initial paperwork today, it would hold your spot while you adjust to the idea. What paperwork? She spread several documents across my coffee table. Just the application for Sunset Manor and the preliminary power of attorney. Nothing binding, just placeholders. I picked up the power of attorney document, scanning the dense legal language. It wasn't preliminary at all. It was comprehensive, giving Marcus complete control over my finances and medical decisions. This seems quite detailed for a placeholder. Ms. Patterson smiled. Legal documents often look more complicated than they are. Your son would simply be authorized to help you with complex decisions. Help me, as if I were already incompetent. I looked at Marcus, studying his face as he waited for my signature. This was my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike and throw a baseball, the man I'd walked down the aisle at his wedding, and he was sitting in my living room lying to my face while planning to steal my life. Marcus, I said slowly, do you really think this is necessary? For just a moment his mask slipped, and I saw something cold flicker in his eyes. Then the concerned son returned. Dad, I know it's hard to accept, but Dr. Reeves was very clear about your condition. If we don't act now, things could get much worse very quickly. I nodded as if accepting his logic and reached for the pen Jennifer held out. My hand trembled, not from nerves but from rage. Then I set the pen down. I need to call Harold Kellerman first. He's handled my legal affairs for 20 years. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Dad, that's not necessary, Marcus said quickly. These are just standard forms. Then Harold won't have any problem with them. Ms. Patterson cleared her throat. Mr. Hartley, sometimes elderly clients become overly dependent on longtime advisors who may not have current expertise in elder care law. Harold has current expertise in everything. I trust him. Jennifer's smile was strained. Of course you do, Philip, but this is really just paperwork to hold your place at the facility. Nothing is set in stone. Then waiting one more day won't matter. I watched them realize they were losing control of the situation. Marcus's jaw tightened. Jennifer's fingers drummed against her purse. Ms. Patterson consulted her watch with obvious irritation. Actually, Ms. Patterson said, I have another client emergency I need to address. Perhaps we should reconvene tomorrow morning. After they left, I sat in my chair for a long time, staring at the papers they'd left behind. The power of attorney document was particularly chilling in its comprehensiveness. Once signed, it would have given Marcus control over every aspect of my life. I called Harold to confirm our appointment for the next morning, then spent the evening reviewing the recording we'd made. Their voices came through clearly. Every lie about my condition, every manipulation, every piece of evidence that they were orchestrating my supposed decline. Tomorrow they would learn that the confused old man they thought they were manipulating had been 3 steps ahead of them all along. The meeting the next morning was scheduled for 10 o'clock at Harold's office. I arrived early, sitting in the familiar leather chair across from his desk while he arranged documents with military precision. Are you absolutely certain about this, Philip? I nodded, looking at the papers that would change everything. They made their choice. Now they live with the consequences. Marcus and Jennifer arrived exactly on time, accompanied again by Ms. Patterson. They looked confident, prepared to close the deal they thought they'd been negotiating. Harold, Marcus said, shaking hands with practiced warmth. Good to see you again. I assume Dad filled you in on the situation? He did indeed. Harold's voice was neutral, professional. Please have a seat. As they settled into chairs around the conference table, I watched their faces. They still saw me as the confused old man who needed their guidance. That was about to change. Before we discuss any new documents, Harold said, I think there are some things you should know about your father's current legal status. He opened a file and pulled out the recording device I'd hidden in my lamp. Marcus frowned, not understanding what he was seeing. What's that? A recording of yesterday's conversation at your father's house, Harold said calmly. Philip, would you like to explain? I leaned forward, meeting Marcus's eyes directly. I heard you and Jennifer planning this 3 weeks ago. I know about the gambling debts, I know about the will you found, I know everything. The color drained from Jennifer's face. Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Dad, I don't understand what you're saying. You understand perfectly. I kept my voice level, controlled. You needed money to pay off your gambling debts, and you discovered I'd changed my will to leave everything to the children's hospital. So you decided to have me declared incompetent so you could challenge that will and get access to my estate. Ms. Patterson was looking between us with growing alarm. Mr. Hartley, if there's been some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, Harold interrupted, was theirs. They assumed Philip was an easy target. They were wrong. He pressed play on the recorder. Marcus and Jennifer's voices filled the room, discussing my supposed mental decline with clinical detachment. Their conversation about creating evidence, about switching doctors, about the $600,000 they planned to inherit. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. That conversation is illegal, Jennifer said desperately. You can't record people without their consent. Actually, Harold replied, in this state only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. Philip consented to recording his own conversation in his own home. Marcus found his voice. Dad, you don't understand. I do have debts, yes, but everything we're doing is because we're genuinely concerned about you. Are you? I pulled out the notebook I'd been keeping. Jennifer, would you like to explain to Harold about all the times I supposedly forgot things? The flooded basement that never happened? The medication confusion that's completely fictional? She said nothing, staring at the table. Marcus, what about your conversation with the lawyer about challenging my will? Was that genuine concern too? Dad, you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. I stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the courthouse where they'd planned to have me declared incompetent. You want to know what's really sad about this? If you'd just talked to me, if you'd explained about the debts and asked for help, I might have considered changing the will back. But instead, you chose to lie, manipulate, and planned to lock me away in a memory care unit. Ms. Patterson was gathering her papers. I think there's been a serious misunderstanding here. I was told Mr. Hartley was experiencing cognitive decline. You were told what they wanted you to believe, Harold said. Philip, would you like to show them the results of your independent evaluation? I handed over Dr. Morrison's report, completed just yesterday. My longtime physician had given me a comprehensive cognitive assessment documenting that I was mentally sharp and showing no signs of dementia or cognitive decline. This is impossible, Marcus said, scanning the report. Dr. Reeves said what you wanted him to hear, I replied. I performed poorly on his test deliberately. It wasn't hard to fake confusion when I knew exactly what you were looking for. Jennifer's composure finally cracked. You manipulative old bastard. Do you have any idea what you've put us through? What I've put you through? My voice rose for the first time. You planned to steal my home, my independence, and my money. You were going to lock me in a facility and convince the world I was too confused to understand what was happening to me. Harold cleared his throat, which brings us to the main purpose of today's meeting. He pulled out a thick document. Philip has made some changes to his estate planning. What kind of changes? Marcus asked warily. I've created a trust, I said, settling back into my chair. The house, the savings, everything goes into a trust for your children, Marcus. Tommy and Sarah will have full access to the funds when they turn 25. Marcus blinked. My children? Your children. Tommy is 16 now, Sarah is 14. They'll need money for college, for starting their lives. But the trust is very specific about how the money can be used. Harold opened the document. The trust explicitly prohibits any access by Marcus Hartley or Jennifer Hartley under any circumstances. They cannot borrow against it, cannot use it as collateral, cannot access it in any way. That's not legal, Jennifer protested. It's perfectly legal, Harold assured her. Philip has the right to leave his money to anyone he chooses, with whatever restrictions he deems appropriate. Marcus was staring at me with something between shock and rage. So we get nothing? You get exactly what you deserve. I met his eyes steadily. Your children will be taken care of, which is what a grandfather should do. But you and Jennifer have shown me exactly who you are. There's more, Harold continued. Philip is also establishing a small fund to pay for family counseling, should Marcus and Jennifer choose to address the issues that led to this situation. And if we don't, then you don't, but you'll never have access to the trust funds. Ms. Patterson stood up. I think my work here is done. Mr. Hartley, I apologize for any misunderstanding about your condition. After she left, the four of us sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Marcus spoke. Dad, I know we made mistakes, but cutting us off completely. I'm not cutting you off, I said quietly. I'm cutting off the people who tried to steal my life. If you want a relationship with me, a real relationship based on honesty and respect, that's possible. But it starts with you acknowledging what you did. Jennifer stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. We were trying to help you. Were you helping me when you lied about my behavior to create evidence of dementia? Were you helping me when you planned to sell my house and lock me in a memory care facility? She had no answer. Marcus looked older somehow, deflated. What happens now? Now you go home and think about whether you want to be the kind of man who tries to manipulate his elderly father, or the kind of man who admits his mistakes and tries to do better. Harold handed him a card. The counseling fund is available whenever you're ready to use it. After they left, I sat in Harold's office feeling strangely empty. I'd won, but victory felt hollow when it came at the cost of my relationship with my son. Any regrets? Harold asked. I thought about it carefully. I regret that it came to this. I regret that Marcus chose money over family. But I don't regret protecting myself, and I don't regret protecting my grandchildren's future. 6 months later, I was living in a comfortable condominium 15 minutes from Tommy and Sarah's school. The house had sold easily, and the proceeds were safely in their trust fund. I'd kept enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life, plus a little extra for the woodworking shop I'd set up in my new garage. Marcus had called twice, awkward conversations where he danced around an apology without quite making one. Jennifer hadn't contacted me at all, but Tommy and Sarah visited every other weekend, and I was teaching Tommy the same woodworking skills I'd once taught his father. Grandpa, Sarah asked one Saturday afternoon as we worked on a birdhouse together, why don't Mom and Dad come with us anymore? I set down my sandpaper and looked at her honest 14-year-old face. Sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love. Your parents made some choices I couldn't accept. But you still love Dad. I'll always love your father. But love doesn't mean accepting behavior that's harmful. She nodded thoughtfully, the way kids do when they understand more than you expect them to. That evening, as I watched the sunset from my new balcony, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. I'd lost a son, but I'd saved my dignity and my grandchildren's future. I'd learned that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones you love most, and that protecting yourself from that hurt isn't selfish, it's necessary. My phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello, son." "Dad, I've been thinking about what you said, about the counseling." I closed my eyes, feeling a flutter of something that might have been hope. "I'm listening. Would you consider family counseling? All of us together?" I looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the darkness, thinking about second chances and the courage it takes to admit you've been wrong. "Yes," I said finally. "I think I would, because sometimes, even when trust is broken, love finds a way to rebuild what seemed lost forever. And sometimes the strongest thing an old man can do is not just protect himself, but leave the door open for those who hurt him to find their way back to who they used to be."